This program is brought to you by the University of California, Davis on iTunes U. For more information, please visit us at itunes.ucdavis.edu.
Hello, everyone. Tonight will be a new topic. In the meantime, I hope that everyone had fun with the first project and got it all done, and will demonstrate it today or tomorrow to Sohail. Anyway, have fun with it. That's the most important part. It really should be fun for you, okay, what you do in this class. Next topic is about interpolation, but before I talk about that, I would like to point out that next week I will not be in town on Tuesday and Wednesday, okay? So also tell this to your friends. Tuesday there won't be a lecture, so there will be a makeup lecture on Monday, okay? This coming Monday, January 28, and it will be here in the same building, Hart Hall. It's just a room a little bit further down the hallway, 1116. So a lecture on Monday at 1:30, no lecture on Tuesday. Okay. So new topic, interpolation. What is interpolation? Interpolation really takes on two means, right? First, it takes on this role. I give you an axis, x, and I give you a function direction, f, and I give you a bunch of sticks, function values, and I want to determine a function that passes through these heights. So I want to generate something like this. Okay, how do I get that? That is interpolation strictly reduced to the setting of a function, x and f of x. So how do I get this function f of x? Such that this function f of x passes through all these points. And these points are an xi and an fi point. This is one setting. The other setting is the more general setting where I just give you points in the plane. So I just call it x and y. And I just give you a sequence of ordered points. So I give you a point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, point number 4, and point number 5. Right? So they have to have a number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what I want is a curve that passes through these points. So this setting is a different setting than that setting. And something else is needed for this particular case, that is a parameter. Right? For each of these points, point number 1, point number 2, point 3, and point 4, and point 5, we need an associated parameter value. Think of that as time, okay? At time 1 second, I'm at that point. I'm at time 2 seconds, I'm at that point 3, 4, 5. Okay, so these values on this t-axis, t for time, correspond to the points on the curve. So t1, t2, t3, t4, and t5. So this here is a functional setting. Functional. And here we have the parametric setting. And the parametric case is, in a sense, a generalization of the functional case. So I will first talk about the functional case. Is a general problem clear what this topic is all about, interpolation? I give you a bunch of points or values, and I want to construct a continuous function that passes through all these values or points, right? Also earlier in class I said the only type of function that you need to understand in this class is a linear function, right? Everything goes back to just understanding how we define a single line or line segment. Linear interpolation. I give you 2 points or 2 function values, and you give me the line that passes through those function values. It always comes back to that. And we only do repeated versions of linear interpolation, in a sense, so far. So I call it interpolation in the functional setting. Functional setting. Very simple. We only have to understand how to do this for 2 given values. x0, x1 are the locations on the x-axis, and I have 2 function values, f0 and f1, and I want to determine the equation of that line. and here is f of x. Everything is linear interpolation, so the function takes on this form. F of x equals, linear interpolation is always something times left value plus something times right value, if I think of it as a combination of two function values. So it is something times left value, f0, plus something times right value, f1. Okay. I have to divide by the length of this interval. You're used to that now. So I divide by x1 minus x0, x1 minus x0. And then the numerator is particular x value. It is x1 minus x and x minus x0. That is the most important building block, and we will use it over and over again. Is it correct? Well, it is correct if I can reproduce these values, right? So I plug x0 into the equation, and I want to get back f0. Is that true? When I plug x0 in there, I get x1 minus x0 divided by the same as 1. 1 times f0 is f0. x0 minus x0 is 0, so nothing else, so it's f0. Same with x1. When you plug x1 in there, you get f1 back. Okay, so that is the simple building block. Now, with this building block, we can do what is called piecewise linear interpolation. Piecewise linear interpolation is, in a sense, the most natural form of interpolation. So, from this to piecewise linear interpolation. What does it mean? It means we have a bunch of these sticks, but we use always line segments to connect them. Okay. So in this setting, I have x, but I have a bunch of values here. Okay. And I want to construct a function f of x. And as I say the function is piecewise linear. That means that between each pair of consecutive function values, I just put a line segment there. Okay, it's the same thing over and over. So a line segment here, a line segment there, and a line segment there. And the locations on the x-axis are just x0. Then this would be an arbitrary xi, and xi plus 1, and the last one would be xn. And we call the values f0, fi, fi plus 1, and fn. So the building block to describe this polygon, right, it's just a polygon, to describe this polygon is the same building block as we have here, except that we have now multiple times this type of a definition. Over each of these intervals, we use this building block, right? So the interesting thing, for example, is this particular segment, just this one, right, which I call f sub I of x. Right? Over each of these intervals now I have a separate function. Right? It's a bunch of independent linear functions. And I need to write down what the function fi is. So I just say fi of x is what? Well, it blends fi and fi plus 1. So it blends fi plus fi plus 1. And then I have to divide or normalize by the length of this interval, xi plus 1 minus xi, xi plus 1 minus xi, xi plus 1 minus xi. And in the numerator, I play the same game as I played it here. So it is xi plus 1 minus x, xi plus 1 minus x, and here it is x minus xi. And now you have n of those building blocks for each interval. So I runs from 0 up to n minus 1. Right. So this is just drawing a polyline, nothing else. Now I want to switch to the parametric setting. And the parametric setting is different. Before I do that, I want to talk about the problems, issues. Issues are the following. I give you 3 points. This is the parametric case. Points in the xy plane. 4 points. 0, 1, 2, 3. And I want to get a curve that passes through there. Now, the generalization of this piecewise linear is just, again, a polygon, right? So the most natural way to do this, in some sense, is to just connect these points by line segments. Okay, then, but there is an entire family of curves that all would go through these points, right? So another one would be this one, of course. I can draw this curve. This solves the problem. I can also pick this one. This one also solves the problem, right? A slightly different curve. Okay, this curve also solves the problem, right? Passing through these 4 points. And another one is, of course, this one. That's another curve that passes through there, right? So there is a bunch of possibilities. So which one is the best one? Which one is a good one? We come back to that later, okay? For right now, just keep this in the back of your mind that there is a problem with respect to an answer to the question, what is a good curve? What do I call good, and how do I construct something that is good? The other problem is the construction of these parameter values. When I have these points given, right, point 0, point 1, point 2, point 3, I need these corresponding parameter values on a t-line, right? And so these points have different distances from each other. So where should these parameter values be? Well, somehow, intuitively, you would think that these distances between the t-values should reflect the distances between the points. That's the way it should be. Okay? So if you were to travel at a constant speed and you move along this polygon, well then, if this is 1 unit and this is like 2 units, then you should have this reflected here, right? 1 unit and 2 units. And then here maybe this is 3 units, right? So where do these parameter values come from? T0, T1, T2, and T3. How do we construct them? Again, this is just a problem I'll come back to later. For right now, for the following, we assume that these time points or these time values are given to us. Okay? In the end, again, the question is important to ask the question, what are the good time values for these points? Because the time values will also determine which of these shapes you get. So far, so good. So now let's go to the parametric setting. Parametric setting. Parametric setting. So what I will put on the board are essentially just the generalizations of these two formulas. What is the generalization of this for the xy plane? And what's the generalization for a polygon? That's all we need to understand. So first case is I give you the plane xy, and I give you 2 points, right? Point 0 and point 1. And these guys now have 2 coordinates, an x0 and a y0. And this guy is an x1 and a y1. And I want to define this particular line that passes through them. In the parametric setting, I said, well, there's this time dimension that comes into the picture. So I have this time axis, t. And somehow I construct these values, t0 and t1. Okay? And now I need to write down the generalization of this equation to get the expression for any point, no longer a function value, but any point, p of t. Point depending on t is what? Now, what's the generalization of this formula? Someone help me. You can just copy it over, but you just have to replace certain things. You have to replace x with t, yeah, and f with p. So which is the left point? The left point has a name called p0 plus something times p1. And then we have to replace x by t. So here it is t1 minus t0, t1 minus t0 that we have to divide by. And in the numerator, we put t. Right? So it is t1 minus t, and here it is t minus t0. Is that correct? Probably is. You can check. So t0 gets mapped to that point, and t1 gets mapped to that point. So from that, we come to the arbitrary polygon. Now comes the generalization of that. Generalization is I have an x and a y, and I have a bunch of points, point 0, point I plus 1, and point n, point 0, point 1, or point I plus 1, and point n. And I want the definition of all these line segments. Here's one, here's one, here's the last one. I'm only interested in the representation for one of them. If I know how to define one of them, I can define all of them, right? By just letting this index I go from 0 to n minus 1. Okay, again, we need parameter values. If I have 4 points on my time axis, I need 4 corresponding time points. Don't care about their computation. They are just given. So t0, ti plus 1, and tn. And I'm interested in this particular chunk and that line segment. And so that corresponds to this interval. Right? So this interval here gets mapped to that part of the overall polygon. So then it's no longer a p of t, but this is just one particular segment of the overall curve. I have to write down what pi of t is. Pi of t is something times the left point, which is pi, plus something times the right point, which is pi plus 1. Okay. What do I put in front of those points? Help me. I divide by ti plus 1 minus ti plus 1 minus ti, and then the numerators, ti minus ti plus 1 minus t, and then t minus ti. Right? So here goes ti plus 1 minus t, and here goes t minus ti. And again, you check by plugging the values of ti and ti plus 1 into the equation, and you will get these endpoints of the segment back. And so I runs from 0 up to, well, the last segment, n minus 1. So I would stay in this parametric setting from now on because it's the general case, right? We want to work in the general case. I go away from the functional setting now. Now I only talk about points. Ultimately, I will talk about, given a bunch of points on my hand from a digitization or scanning process, by how to interpolate points on the hand. Right? It's the general case of that. So, but we are not there yet. So, what comes next? I said the only kind of interpolation you have to understand is this, right? You have to know how to make lines. That's all you need. How to make a line. But you want to go beyond a polygon, right? A polygon solves the problem, but it's not really cool. It's not smooth. It's not round. It's not curved, right? It has corners. So now we want to go from a polygon to something that is smoother. How do we do that? Okay. Now the principle is very simple and beautiful. So I do repeated linear interpolation again. I use linear interpolation over and over again. In what sense? If I give you 2 points, then you blend these 2 points by using a linear function, right? 2 points, and you linearly interpolate 2 points to get a line. Okay. Now, on the next level, I give you 2 lines, a line number 1 and a line number 2. I give you 2 lines. What can you do now? I give you 2 points, and you blend 2 points linearly, and you get a line. Now I give you 2 lines, and you can blend 2 lines linearly, and you get a parabola. So that's the generalization of that. So all we do is we apply linear interpolation over and over again to higher and higher degree creatures. Right? So initially we do linear interpolation for 2 points, we get a line. Then we do linear interpolation of 2 lines, and we get a parabola. And then we do linear interpolation of 2 parabolas, and we get a cubic curve, and so forth. And that's the underlying principle for what is called Aitken interpolation. So Aitken's approach to polynomial interpolation. Polynomial interpolation. So the principle was the following. Principle only use linear interpolation as building block. And apply it over and over again. And apply it repeatedly. Apply it repeatedly. Meaning what? I take 2 points, I interpolate them linearly, and I call it linear interpolation. Linear interpolation, you get a line. You get 1 line. Okay. Now I take 2 lines. Next step, you take 2 lines, and you interpolate 2 lines, linear interpolation, and you get 1 parabola, or a quadratic function, but it's parabola. Okay. Now you can go on and on. Now you take 2 parabolas, and linearly interpolate them. Lin-int, and you get 1 cubic curve. And so on. Until you get, finally, in the last step, 1 polynomial curve of degree n. So here at the end you have 1 polynomial curve curve of degree n, which interpolates n plus 1 points, interpolating P0, P1, Pn. And now it's time to do an example. For that, to understand geometrically what this principle actually means, okay. Example, n equals 2. That means I give you 3 points, point 0, point 1, point 2. If I'm doing this in the parametric setting, I also need corresponding t-values. I construct these somehow. I don't know how to do it, but I need them. So here I have my t-values, t0, t1, and t2. Here I have my points, p0, p1, and p2. And first, I define the 2 line segments. And then I want to get a parabola that passes through there. So without any harm, I can give these original points a superscript 0, indicating that they are the original points, generation 0. Right? You have seen all of that. So first step is, first I construct 2 line segments, 2 lines. I get a definition for this guy, for that line, and I get a definition for that guy. Okay, what is the definition for this one? I call it P0 of t, which is a combination of P0 and P1. And the other line segment, P1 of t, is formally the same. It interpolates P1 and P2. Okay, and what are the ratios in front of them? First one is T1 minus T0, T1 minus T0, and numerators are T1 minus T and T minus T0. And here we have to divide by T2 minus T1, T2 minus T1, and numerators are T2 minus T and T minus T1. Okay, so these are the original points. They have a superscript of 0. So we can call these guys 1 in their superscript, right? Generation 1. Now, what do we have at this? At this point, we had the original points, and we have 2 line segments. This guy is called P01 of t, and this guy, this line segment, is called P11 of t. What do we want? Now we want to linearly interpolate 2 lines. What does it mean? We just linearly interpolate these 2 functions. Okay. Second step, we obtain one parabola / quadratic function or quadratic curve. Okay. We do the same principle. But now we interpolate actually linear segments. So we construct P0 generation 2 of t, and now we blend what? We blend these 2 functions together. So here's our ratio, and we blend P01 of t plus something times the right segment, which is P11 of t. P11 of t. Now comes the trick. The original line segments were only defined over the individual segments. the entire parabola is defined over the entire parameter space from t0 to t2. So therefore, we have to divide or normalize by t2 minus t0 here, t2 minus t0. And in the numerator, we have to put t2 minus t, and here it is t minus t0. Okay. So this is a quadratic function. Why is it a quadratic function? Well, here you have t, and then when you plug p01 of t in there, that is also a linear polynomial. When you multiply all of that out, you get t squared, right? T squared is in there. Okay, right? You can plug the expression p01 from here into the equation and so forth and collect terms, and you will see that this is a quadratic function. So then what does the function or the curve look like? Well, it will look somewhat like this, right? It will be this parabola, which is a blend of two line segments. Very neat. So this guy is the resulting unique. There's one answer. It's unique. There's no choice. Okay, there's one answer. That is the unique parabola. Unique parabola P02 of t. Okay, and that's the answer I want. A smooth curve passing through the 3 points. Okay, again, geometry. The only thing we need to understand is linear interpolation. And now we come back to our schemes, right? We always like our triangular schemes. Do you see the triangular scheme here? Yes, you see it, right? Original points, 3 of them. Then come 2 lines, and then comes 1 parabola, or a point on the parabola, right? It's a triangular scheme. So I can just arrange this differently, and I put this on the other side. And you see that formally it looks just like a de Castillo triangular scheme for computing points on a Bezier curve, even though this is different. So can arrange this in a triangular scheme. Can arrange computations in a triangular scheme. Okay, and when I do that, for this particular example, n equals 2, I start with my original points, p00, p10, and p20. Then I always combine 2 of them. I combine these 2 original points in this form to get a new point, p01. I take these 2 points, combine them, and I get a point p11. Right, and then the last step is I take these 2 points on 2 lines, and I blend them linearly, and I get 1 point on a parabola, which I call P02. And they all depend on t, of course, right? Except the original ones, they don't depend on t, they are just the original points. And then you multiply the first point by something, you multiply this point, the second point by something, and then you add it up, right? So this is it. P02 is the point. P at t. The point that you want. And now that you understand how to do this for 3 points, you can do it for 4 points, for 5 points, for 6 points, right? If you know how to do this scheme, then you just build the loop, right? For all the columns do, for all the rows in each column do. You only have to understand how these indices, the t indices, change, right? Shoot. You need as many t values as you have points. How to assign particular values to the t values is a separate problem. So if you have different t values, then these values are different, right? Because the t values define everything. Huh? So therefore, you also have to choose a good parametrization. What is a good set of parameter values, t sub I, for a sequence of points? Separate problem. Very important one, and I'll come back to that later. Okay. Okay, so now we have the input, the geometry, we have the building blocks, it's just linear interpolation, and then we repeatedly apply that, repeated linear interpolation. We have a beautiful triangular scheme, and we can code this up as a double loop, right? Can program this, can implement this with a double loop, implement this scheme using a double loop concept, which leads to quadratic time complexity again, of course. The scheme using a double loop. Etc., etc. And now I want to make the construction more geometric and do a few illustrations concerning the geometry of this actual approach. So what is the geometric construction here? Geometrical meaning. Well, if we talk about geometrical meaning, we have to make pictures. I do a few examples for n equals 2. Okay, that's what we can still understand. Let's see, I do 2 examples. First one is this. I give you this polygon. Okay. 3 points, and for these points I give you t values, t0, t1, t2, t0, t1, t2. And so there is invisible parabola, right? You don't have it yet, but you need, for rendering, you need to compute a bunch of points on it, right? So you have t values marching from t0 up to t2, and then for every t value that you plug in, you will get a point on the parabola. Right? That's the way you want to do that. And now I give you the geometry, what the meaning is. So for example, I would like to evaluate here. I would like to evaluate for a t value that's between t0 and t1. Where is this point? Where is probably that point, right? How do I get it? So the geometrical construction is based on linear interpolation. And the formulas that I had on the board before did do the following. They looked at the ratios of all of this. So here I have certain ratios. Right, here is kind of like, say, this is an alpha to beta to gamma. And I will map this ratio, alpha to beta, onto the first line segment. That's what I'm dealing with. Linear interpolation over this interval applied to the first 2 points. Okay, take this ratio and map it here. So I get a point there. Right, now I do linear interpolation over this segment. So the first step was I consider this configuration, and I map alpha to beta here. Alpha to beta. The next interpolation step is over the second interval. I linearly interpolate these 2 points, but at a value that's outside the interval. I interpolate here, right? Here's where I have to interpolate or evaluate. So when I map this ratio, beta to gamma, onto this line segment, and this configuration looks like this. Right, here is my beta to gamma ratio, and I have this point. All right, this was what I called the first step. The first step when I had the formulas on the board. Now in the next step, I do linear interpolation of these 2 points to get a point on the parabola. Okay, so this is what I call the second step in my formulas. The second step considers the entire interval, so I have to consider the entire range, everything, and I have to consider only these ratios. I call it A to B. And where do I have to map this ratio? Well, I have this intermediate polygon again, just like in the Bezier times. I take this guy and map this ratio, A to B, on there. So that would look like this. That point would lie somewhere here. Right? That's the point on the curve. Okay. Now let's do it on the other side. Let's evaluate for a point there. Same configuration. All looks a little bit bizarre, so we have to familiarize ourselves with it. 3 points.
The first part, the star, is that between the part that's actually on the quadratic curve?
This point lies on this parabola that goes through it.
Is it between those 2 points?
These points are not.
Alpha to beta or alpha to beta plus gamma?
This one is A to B,
Oh,
this
okay.
ratio. Okay?
Okay.
This ratio here will be the A to B ratio. Yes, A and B contain alpha and beta in there. So the numbering, I should also talk about the numbering. So these points are in the scheme P00, 0. This point is P10, 0. This point is P20, 0. These intermediate points have the names P01, this was a point P11, and this is a point on the curve, which has a name P02. Those are the points on the scheme. Now we do it over here, and we evaluate at the different location T, T0, T1, T2, T0, T1, T2, and I want to evaluate somewhere here in this right interval. Okay, that one. So again, I have these ratios here, alpha to beta to gamma. In the first step, I linearly interpolate over the individual segments. So in the first step, I have to interpolate over this interval at this location. So I have to extrapolate, and I actually end up here. Right? So I have to map this configuration, which is a ratio alpha to beta. I have to map this onto the first line segment. So I map it here. Okay, and get this point. So this is this ratio alpha to beta. And in the second step, I use this interval, and I interpolate these 2 points at this location using the ratio beta to gamma. So I map beta to gamma on this, and I get this location by doing beta to gamma split. So this was, again in the triangular scheme, the first step. The second step considers the entire range from the beginning to the very end, and here is the evaluation point, and I use this ratio A to B, and that ratio will get mapped onto this intermediate line segment, and I map the ratio A to B, here's the evaluation point, I map that here, and so here's my ratio A to B, and beta to gamma was this, right? Beta to gamma. If I were to use many, many t values, then of course ultimately I would generate a bunch of points that lie on the desired parabola. Right? Now you can take this, move it around forward and backward, and then you would get a bunch of points on the parabola as you wanted. Same here, right? I just evaluated for t value further to the right. But anyway, the parabola that is here is that parabola. Right? So this is the geometrical meaning and interpretation of the formulas that I have on the board. I could start with the geometry first and then come up with the formulas, or I can give you the formulas first and then tell you what it means geometrically. It's equivalent, right? Whatever you like better. Some people like to think more algebraically, and some people like to think more geometrically. Now, if I can do this for a parabola, then I can also do it for a cubic curve, right? I can now linearly interpolate 2 parabolas, and I get a cubic, right? 2 points, a line. 2 lines, 1 parabola. 2 parabolas, 1 cubic curve. So I do one example for that, for the geometry. And then you see how these pictures look like. N equals 3. Okay. Again, the important part is to understand what is being interpolated linearly. I give you a simple polygon. Okay, 4 points. Point 0, P0, P1, P2, P3. If I have these points, I need a T line, and I have T values, T0, T1, T2, T3. And say I want to evaluate at the middle of this cubic curve that I don't see, but it's somewhere there. T1, T2, and T3. And I want to evaluate the cubic curve invisible so far at this location. What do I do? In the first step, I do linear interpolation over each individual interval, evaluating each of the 3 line segments. That's the first step. The first step considers these ratios. What are they? Here's an alpha, here's a beta, here's a gamma, and here's a delta, right? So in the first step, I have to evaluate over the first interval from here to here, but the evaluation point is outside. There it is. So I have to map this ratio alpha to beta on the first line segment. When I do that, it looks like this. Here is my alpha to beta thing, the ratio, and here's this intermediate point right there. Now I do linear interpolation over the middle interval, and here's the evaluation point, and I map the ratio beta to gamma onto this line segment. Where is it? Well, it's right there at the middle, because this evaluation point is at the middle of this interval. So then here I have the ratio beta to gamma. Now in the last step, I linearly interpolate these 2 points, but I have to interpolate over the last interval. So the evaluation point is to the left of it. So it's to the left of it. So here it is. And I map this ratio, which I called gamma, to delta. I map this onto this line segment. So the evaluation point, the evaluated point, lies outside, namely here. Here's the point, and the ratio here is gamma to delta. This is what I called first step in the scheme. Okay, so I have 3 intermediate points, and they define a new intermediate polygon, which lies outside the entire configuration, but so be it. In the second step, now comes the second step, I consider 2 neighboring intervals that I interpolate over those. So in the next step, I consider going from here to here, and here is my evaluation point. I call it just the evaluation point triangle. And the ratio I have to consider is only this ratio, really, is that matters. I call it A to B. Okay. Where do I map this? I have to map this ratio onto this first new line segment. When I do that, I get this point. And I have to consider the next pair of consecutive intervals in this domain and have to evaluate at this t value. And I have a new ratio, which I call it C to D. Okay. Where do I map that ratio? I map it here. C to D is mapped here. C to D, and this was A to B. Okay. This is in the scheme, the second step. And now comes the last step, step number 3, third. In the third step, I have to interpolate one more time here on this particular line by considering the entire domain from T0 to T3. And here's my evaluation location. Okay, and I have a certain ratio, and I call it, E to F, E to F. And this ratio gets mapped onto this line segment. So here is the midpoint, and I split that in a ratio E to F. And that's a point on the cubic curve. Where's the cubic curve? Well, the entire cubic curve looks somewhat like this, right? And this is just one point on it. So when you move this evaluation point between T0 and T3, you would trace out the entire curve. I know that this geometrical construction is not intuitive. It's not the same as the Bezier construction, right? It's different. All right, do a few more examples of these at home with n equals 2 and n equals 3, and then you will fully appreciate it. Are there any questions about this for us? No? Is clear? No. All of these things are related. Aitken's scheme for interpolation, Lagrange schemes for interpolation, a Newton scheme for interpolation, a Vandermonde scheme for interpolation. They all construct the same curve. There is one unique. I say it's unique, right? It gives you the one curve or points on that one curve, but they compute them differently. Okay, and I like all of these which are based on repeated linear interpolation, right? I apply this one principle over and over again, just linearly interpolating two elements, interpolating 2 points, interpolating 2 lines, interpolating 2 things, right? That's what I do over and over again. That's all I need. And when I apply this over and over again, then I can construct higher and higher degree curves, right? From points to lines to quadratics to cubics to quartics to quintics, and then the degree goes higher and higher, right? Okay. Of course, when you program this and use this triangular scheme, the Aitken scheme, which is triangular and it's described in the book by Farron, it's also of quadratic complexity, right? You have a bunch, n points, and then you have roughly n rows and n columns, right? So it's n squared again to compute points on the curve. But maybe you can speed it up, right? Maybe you can speed it up. So the next scheme, or the next way to write down polynomial interpolation is based on Lagrange. So Lagrange has looked into this too, and has just used a different way to derive the same curve using a different notation. So there are these so-called Lagrange polynomials that come into the picture now, and I want to motivate them very simply. So another way to do this, to write this, is Lagrange. Shoot.
What was the base polynomial set?
Very good question. What are the basis polynomials? Right. Think about it. Next time we come back to that, and then you can tell me, okay? It always reduces to a bunch of basis polynomials, a basis function, right? Mm-hmm. And the way Lagrange looks at it, he looks at it completely from the point of view of basis functions, okay? There are certain basis functions that define everything. So now we see this. Once we have put Lagrange on the board, then we can go back to Aitken's scheme and see what the basis functions are over there. Lagrange's approach to the same thing, to polynomial interpolation, to polynomial interpolation. It gives you the same result. It doesn't give you a different answer. It just derives the answer differently. This is the way it's done. And I just explain it for 2 points. So there's xy. Then we have 2 points, point 0, point 1. And I want to write this line segment, P, is a function depending on t, and I would like to write it in such a way that it is that it can be written P0 times a polynomial L0 of t plus 0.1 times another polynomial L1 of t. And these capital L's stand, of course, for Lagrange. And I need for this, of course, also my parameter line, t, and I have my 2 time points on there, t0 and t1. Okay, So it all boils down to understanding what these polynomials should be for this equation to hold. So what are the functions L0 and L1? And I give you the answer to that. So here is my parameter box for t. And here on the t-axis, time runs from t0 to t1. And the first Lagrange polynomial starts at 1 and goes down to 0. So this height value here is 1. And it is 1 for t0, and it's 0 for t1. So this thing is called L0 of t. And the other function, when I plot it over this parameter box, t, and t goes from t0 to t1, it starts at 0 and goes up to 1. So this is Lagrange polynomial L1 of t. This is the representation I want. And since I wanted this representation, I had to construct the polynomials like this. Now, does it work? Using these functions, do I indeed represent the line? Yes or no? Yes, right? So what do? I evaluate this function for t0. What does it give me? P at t0 is p0 times L0 evaluated at t0. That has the value 1 there. That means I get 1 times p0 plus p1 times the second polynomial evaluated at the left corner, which is 0. So it's 0. Right? So I get exactly what I want. So if I can do it with 2 functions, I can do it with 3 functions, with 4 functions, with 5 functions, with any functions, right? Boils down to really understanding what these polynomials are. They are not just always linear polynomials. If I deal with 3 points, then probably they are quadratic polynomials. In general, what are these Lagrange polynomials? Li of t is a Lagrange polynomial. Satisfying a certain condition, satisfying the following condition. Whenever I have a Lagrange polynomial Li of degree n of t, and I evaluate it at one of these knots, at a knot tj, then it takes on either the value of 1 if j equals I, or it is 0 otherwise. Okay, so a simple plot t. I give you a bunch of t values, right? There's a bunch of t values here. And it's degree n polynomial. It goes from t0, t1, up to some. This is tn minus 1, and here is tn. And here is the line 1. And I'm interested in the general shape of this polynomial. What is the shape of the polynomial Li here? Well, it says when I evaluate Li at ti, then I get the value 1. It should have the value 1 there. And at all the other knots, at all these other t values, it should have the value 0. Okay, so it must be 0 here, 0 here, 0 here, 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, so the general shape of this guy looks like that. It is 1, it has to drop down to 0, 0, and then it oscillates around. So it is 1, it goes down to 0, goes up again, goes down, it has to wiggle, right, like a polynomial, wiggle around. This is one of those polynomials. It is 0 at all the t values except at ti. So li is 1 at ti. And now I can construct these functions for each of the individual t values, right? I have one of those L polynomials. So this is Lagrange polynomial Li n of t has the value 1 there. Now I can sketch a bunch of those. Right, so that is the general case. And now we become more concrete and just maybe sketch the Lagrange polynomials of degree 3, the cubic ones. Example, n equals 3. So that means cubic Lagrange polynomials, cubic Lagrange polynomials, Lagrange polynomials. Okay. I draw everything in this T box. So I have a little parameter box here. So here is my parameter T. And T0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. I have 4 T values, T0, T1, T2, and T3. And now I have to construct how many Lagrange polynomials there are 4, right? 1 for each of the T values. The first Lagrange polynomial is 1 at the first T value, and it's 0 at the others. So what is its general shape? It is 1 here, has to go down to 0, has to go up again to 0, has to go back to 0, right? So you know what its general shape has to be. It starts here, goes down to 0, wiggles around a little bit, and that's what it does. Okay, so that is L0 for T0. The next one belongs to, or is associated with T1. How does it look like? It has to start at 1, and then it has to go down, right? It has to go down here. And goes down and comes up again. It has to be 0 at all these other places. Okay, so that is the second polynomial. The third polynomial is 1 here, and it's 0 at the 3 others. So it is 1 here, and then looks like that, and here has to go down, right? That's the shape of that guy. And then the last one, well, I don't draw it because there are already too many curves on the board, okay? But you get the general feel for it. So this guy is L0, right? T0, L0, n equals 3 of t, right? This polynomial here is L1, degree 3 of t, and the next one is L2, n equals 3 of t, and so forth. That's what these guys look like, and they always have this here is the value 1. That's the way they look like, and they are polynomials. So now we have to write them down what they are. This is just kind of like qualitatively what they have to look like, right? So what are they? We need the definition, right? But how are they defined? Well, we know where they have to have their zeros. And since we require them to have their zeros at certain values, we can write the polynomial down, right? If you know where a polynomial has its zeros, you just write it as a product of the zeros, essentially, right? So that's what we do. So therefore, thus, and this is a big summary, okay, I can now write down what the polynomial should be. I start with an I n, and I call it tilde of t. This will be a polynomial that I want to be 0 at all the knots, at all the t values, but not at ti. So it's a product of t minus t0 times t minus ti minus 1 times t minus ti plus 1 times and the last term here is t minus tn. This polynomial has zeros at all the knots, right? You see that? If I plug the values, the ti values in there, it's 0. And it has some value at ti, right? So at some ti it has some value, and I have to divide by that later on. Okay. So I can write this in product form. Can just now say also what is the value of Li n when I evaluate it at the value ti.
Ti will be 1.
Pardon?
To ensure that a Ti, Li will be 1.
That's exactly the point. You are getting to the point. So what does this mean? What is the meaning of that?
It means that it'll have roots at everywhere else.
It has roots everywhere, right? At t0, at t1, at t2, at ti minus 1, at ti plus 1, at tn. Right? It has roots at all these t values, except this is where I left something out. What is missing there? At I, right? And what is it at I? It has some value there. It doesn't have a root there, right? So it has a value there. Okay. Pardon? It needs to be normalized, right? So what is the value of this polynomial for ti? You plug it in there, right? You plug the value ti in there and you get some value. Huh? So you can also evaluate this. Li evaluated at ti is what?
Ti minus t0 times t1 minus ti, or ti minus t1.
Right, so it's ti minus t0 times times ti minus ti minus 1 times ti minus ti plus 1 times times ti minus tn, right? That's the value there, which is not 1, right? It's some value. It's not 0. It's some positive or negative value, right? Okay. Now continue with your thoughts. What do I have to do? I have to normalize, right? Normalization is always taking one thing and dividing it by something that normalizes everything at the particular value, right? So from this, these two expressions define a Lagrange polynomial via normalization. Lagrange poly via normalization. Okay, so I just put the final definition of this on here, normalized. And now I draw it somewhat differently. So I say, what is Lagrange polynomial I? of t, okay, it is a big normalized something. And now I also want to summarize all these products. I just use the product symbol, okay. So there is a big product, and there is t minus tj, okay, and j goes from 0 up to n, but j is different from I. Okay, and now I normalize by that by evaluating this polynomial at ti, j from 0 to n, j different from I, and now it's ti minus tj. That is the normalized Lagrange polynomial of degree n. And when you multiply it all out, when you think about it, this one is 0 at all the t values, and it is 1 at ti. Okay, this is the way I want to construct it. There is a unique polynomial that does it, only one. A unique answer. So it's unique. Should be clear though. It's unique. So all of this is in the book, of course, right? Everything that I say in class is in the books, right? What is my role? My role is just to help you interpret the book, right? Or make some funky pictures, and the pictures hopefully explain all the text and the formulas in the book, right? You have to get used to this formula, I know. So digest the derivation of this formula a little bit at home, right? The formula comes out of the construction, out of the desire to have a polynomial of degree n that is 0 at all the t values except at 1 value ti. And there it should be 1. Those are the constraints for the polynomial. And when you write those constraints down, the answer for that is this particular Lagrange polynomial. Now, why did Lagrange like these? Because now you can write the unique polynomial interpolant going through a bunch of points in a very nice way. Now can write the unique degree n polynomial interpolant passing through n plus 1 points, passing through n plus 1 points P and Ts in this way. Okay. XY. I give you a bunch of points, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. Okay. I need t values for that. T0, T1, T2, T3. T0, T1, T2, T3. And I have my Lagrange polynomials living above this. 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1. Okay, those are the different Lagrange polynomials I've sketched there. Now I can write this curve, this unique polynomial curve. There's only one for it, subject to keeping those t values fixed. If I change the t values, then the curve changes. I can write this curve, the polynomial curve of t, as 0.0, which is this guy, 0.0, 0.1, point n minus 1, and point n. We want to be general, so this is Tn minus 1 and Tn is P0 times Lagrange polynomial L0 n of t plus plus the last point Pn times Lagrange polynomial n of degree n of t. And then I can summarize it with a formula notation. Sum I from 0 to n. The points become the coefficients in this representation. Points times basis functions. Points pi times lin of t. P of t, and a nice, beautiful expression. Why is it nice? Why did Lagrange want it to look like this? Because the given points occur as coefficients in this expression. Okay? So the whole goal was to come up with a bunch of basis functions that allows me to write the answer to the problem, passing a curve through a bunch of points, n plus 1 points, to write it in such a way that the points themselves become the multipliers in front of the polynomials. Okay, and that goal drives the construction of these Li basis functions. And that's it for today. Thanks. No discussion section this Friday. Next discussion section will be on B-spline curves whenever I've talked about that. Okay.
The preceding program was brought to you by UC Davis on iTunes U. Please visit us at itunes.ucdavis.edu.